I was saying the leading question of our conversation today is what will withhold the test of time and space? I think it will be an interesting one, and I'm very grateful to be here and very excited about the discussion that we will have. So get ready to dive into this topic with us and see what objects can evoke in us when we have interactions, when it comes to our future plans, our intentions, when viewed through the lens of time and space. Maybe a question to think about while we discuss is, how do you believe the significance of an item changes when considering its role and impact across different periods of time and locations in your life? Let me now properly introduce to you our two panelists, starting with Adriana. Adriana has a background in theoretical physics and is currently a researcher, expert, and advisor in quantum biology and space science at institutions in various parts of the world. In preparation for extreme conditions on Earth and beyond, she launched Proudly Human's Off-World project, which has taken her to some of the most extreme environments on the planet. Adriana is a director at the Foundation of Space Development Africa and a lead scientist for the Foundation's Africa to Moon project, currently shortlisted for launch to the lunar South Pole. Africa to Moon will be Africa's first moon mission and potentially the world's first lunar radio telescope, performing science not possible from Earth. Her book, Out of This World and Into the Next, will be published internationally next year. Ladies and gentlemen, hands together for Adriana Marais. Adriana, anything I forgot?
No.
Then continuing with Paula. Paula is a London-based Argentine strategic consultant, trend forecaster, and ethnographer. She's a leading expert in human behavior, material culture, and global consumption, directing user-centric and future vision projects for the likes of Google, IKEA, LVMH, and Nike. She's also a designer, photographer, and visual artist. Her creative work straddles business, anthropology, and art. She's the author of the book Everything We Touch, published in 2015, a book that introduced us to storytelling with objects, portraying people's lives worldwide, presented by a single photograph of every object they touched in a day or during a day. Her documentary, Future Archaeology, continued this journey, challenging us to imagine how future generations would make sense of us by decoding our physical footprint. She's a design future and research tutor at the Royal College of Arts and Imperial College London. Her work has been published and exhibited in galleries around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, hands together for Paula Zuccotti.
Thank you. Yes.
So, did I forget anything there?
No, pleasure to be here. Thank you,
Thank
Markus.
you.
Yes.
I'm so glad to be here with the two of you. I want to start a discussion with you, Adriana. So, in this introduction, in the bio, I saw the title of the book, and you launched this project called Proudly Human's Off-World project. And here on the screen and in the program of the Future Forum, there is something behind this, right?
Well, at some point, somebody or maybe me wrote aspiring Martian there, but let me say, first of all, this is such an exciting time to be on planet Earth, and I'm honored to be here with you all at this event in particular. So we sit here with a really unique collection of people with so many transportative conversations, especially this morning's opening panel, I think, took us to other worlds and other spaces in our minds. So while we sit here in the present, I think while this is a future conference, we are also looking to the past for inspiration on how to approach the future. So while I still think the biggest adventure in the history of life on Earth, the 4 billion year history of life on Earth, that it has taken us to evolve from single-celled organisms to the current complex biosphere that we see around us today. This is a really exciting time in history where, for the first time, our species, humanity, has developed the capability to expand beyond our home planet. This is really an exciting time to be alive. We face many challenges, but we also have many new and exciting technologies with which to face these challenges. But underneath it all, I think, is more we need to question the spirit and the culture with which we are focusing and looking towards the future. So, yeah, when will we expand beyond Earth? I guess we can go into these conversations, and what kind of objects will we bring with us? We can revisit these questions. But I think the most important question is how we will go to the future. And I'm not talking necessarily about the rocket technology, which is basically 100 years old. Tsiolkovsky, the father of rocket science, proposed the liquid propulsion system of burning hydrogen and oxygen back in 1903, and that's how we'll get there. But more, I mean, like, with what culture and with what spirit will we go forth towards the future? And yeah, I'd just like to say that it's been wonderful to be here at this event and hear individuals really reimagining the future based on the past. In 1 billion years, the sun will envelop the Earth. So that's 1 billion out of 4 billion. So we've got 20% left of the time of life on Earth to begin thinking about transporting all terrestrial life. I think we have the responsibility for that to another world. So that might sound like a long period of time, but as people thinking about the future, I would encourage us that there's no time like the present to start preparing for this expansion beyond home. But of course, this is also a time to reflect on reimagining our society here on Earth. So that was pretty broad, but yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that was a good introduction. I think we will definitely come back to a couple of the points that you just mentioned. Paula, you brought a trailer with you that we want to play first, or
yes,
yeah?
Yes, I could do that. I can play. It's a 3-minute video about one of my projects that is called Everything We Touch and Future Archaeology. And before I play it, let me introduce it to you. I started my career 25 years ago as an industrial designer. So I've always worked in the design and development of our everyday products. And then moreover on the research and foresight of the future of those products. And by doing so much ethnographic research and work around the world, I started to realize that our physical interactions with our everyday things were changing. So I felt the urge to document that before many of the objects that we use and consider everyday usuals change. So I started that journey then, and the film that I'm going to show you will show you the process. But the way I did it, I wanted to capture our everyday physical footprint. So I started to photograph what people touch in one day of their lives, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, as a way of capturing an X-ray, not a selfie of our lives. The real things. What we are, what we do. Let's play it, please. Yeah. I am Paula Zuccotti. I am an industrial designer, ethnographer, and trend forecaster. As an industrial designer, I work with objects and systems. As an ethnographer, I always immerse myself in the life of others. As a trend forecaster, I anticipate and predict change. I have traveled the world observing behaviors, emotions, interactions to understand how we do things and how we feel. I always find myself in a different place. And the beauty is in what you see and what you make of it. I see objects as clues, as storytellers that reveal insights into how we live our daily lives.
When you just look at the artifacts of somebody's life, it is very much what an archaeologist does, right? I mean, they dig up stuff, and just from a shard of pottery, they could sometimes tell a lot about the civilization that lived. So, in lieu of having these things as artifacts, maybe future generations will find this kind of thing very interesting, I think.
Future Archaeology is a wider project that spins off from my first book, Everything We Touch. The premise of Everything We Touch is, can we make sense of someone just by looking at all the objects that they touch in one day and let their physical footprint tell me their story?
You could easily relate to other people through objects. Being able to understand that at an individual level, I think is a brilliant exercise.
Sometimes I think you learn how deep is reality for the other ones, how complex is like everyday living. As you get closer, everything gets more complicated. So from de cerca, nadie es normal.
But it's the fact that it's all at once. You just go, there it is. It gives you a perspective that you'd never normally get. You never see life that way.
If one does do what you've done, get people to collect the objects together of their one day in their life, anything that documents a specific moment of an individual has an incredible value.
When I see this, my first reaction is that visceral one. My God, this is beautiful, which encourages you to go in and have a look. And then when you go in and have a look and start to analyze what's gone on here, then the second word that comes to mind is it's absolutely fascinating.
Spanning from a cowboy in Tucson, Arizona, to a nun in Madrid, to a 1-month-old baby in London, and a 71-year-old puppeteer in Shanghai, I travel the world photographing the physical footprint of friends and complete strangers. Our everyday interactions are changing, and so is our physical footprint. And I want these photos to offer us a template to reflect on our future. I'm on a quest to create a time capsule of our lives. This is future archaeology.
So, where we want to go and why this is called Through Time and Space is because with Adriana, as you've heard, we will also think about and discuss what it means to take things in space. That means really also outer space, off planet, maybe to Mars, maybe even further, but also generally in space when we move. And by the work of Paula, we want to also talk about the meaning of the objects, the stories they tell, and why we maybe choose to keep certain objects in our lives, or maybe want to get rid of some items as soon as possible and not take them through time. And so this is how we want to structure this discussion, open a huge canvas where hopefully we can paint a nice story. Paula, I want to stay with you and this trailer first. So you say you analyzed what stories objects tell about our lives. So if you want to make this connection to which items we want to keep that are important to us in life, that tell our story, what did you learn through your book and your project about the different cultures, how they choose which items they want to keep through time as they progress into the future?
I think, a few of the things you said, but I would say if we want to talk through cultures, you would be amazed how similar we all are and how a day in a life is so similar. We wake up, we go through the day, there are moments of work, moments of eating, bathing, grooming, entertainment, surviving, coping, stressing, meditating, relaxing. Like, we're so similar in essence that what I like about the project is that it let me see those similarities rather than dwelling on the differences, and I think that's very powerful. And I've been taking these photos for longer than 10 years now, and I've also seen changes, and also with multiculturalism and globalization, and not that it wasn't there 10 years ago, but when you photograph most people living in the city, many of them are not from the city. So you see the juxtaposition of all the objects that come from one's culture and background and the ones that are essential for the city where you live in. And I love seeing that blend of cultures on the photography as well. What objects people hold on to them, that's something I would say very personal, but everybody has them, and it has to do with objects are great storytellers and repositories of memories and things that happen to us. When I made the decision of photographing a day in the life, it was something that I thought about it a lot, because one thing is to ask someone, can you show me or tell me about your favorite objects? And that's a very curated with a reason, purpose exercise where you will find the objects that you want to define yourself by, and people tend to pick the book they read, the clothes they wear, the accessories they have, the movies they like. But when you see a day in a life, you get the things you choose, like a pair of shoes, with the inevitable, the things that you consciously probably don't put so much intention, but it's essential to your daily living, your Tupperware, your tea towel, your cling film, your parking ticket, and all of those things. And I think that's kind of like the beauty, where you see the collection of everything together and the story that they're telling us about how we live our daily lives.
I imagine it was quite an interesting journey, because I guess to take those photos, you enter a very private space of people when they share, these are my essential items. But what I also hear is that essential can be seen from two different perspectives, because obviously shoes might be essential because they're also, we want to wear them for different reasons, but maybe for most of us, not everyone for sure, it's not the essential item that writes the story of our life. Can you maybe say if you know or have seen in what kind of categories those essential items are that write the stories of our life that we want to take through time?
Yes, I'll show some examples. Can we show the slides of the photos first of what people touching one day in their lives, and then I will go back to the essential items a little bit later on when we talk about the other project that I did during lockdown. But that's kind of like a canvas from dawn to dusk of my photographs. And I show everything in chronological order of touching. So the first thing you do in the morning, I read like a text. It's kind of like a language of objects. But you talked about in the personal stories, I mean, it is amazing how much you can learn about someone just by asking, about the objects and the stories and the permission they give you to enter personal spaces that otherwise you may not enter. So they are great storytellers of their own, and the collection they make. We have here some visuals. I put them in order of age. So the photo you saw before is a 1-month-old baby. This is a 2-year-old girl in Tokyo, and they go through as, on the background, and you can see how the things we touch change as we also go through different stages in life. But I'll go back to the essential. I think the essential is an interesting word, because one is the essential in terms of functionality. Your toothbrush, is essential. And then it's essential when things change in your life, or when our values are shaken, or our hopes and futures are shaken, and then we change how we view things. I did a project that I will show you later during lockdown, when I asked people to show their 15 most essential items. And the essential took the value of what are the things that I value the most today based on the circumstances I find myself in. And I think that's a really good question for us to ask ourselves and reflect on it. So to put a new perspective on, our interactions.
Yeah, definitely. Adriana, your topic, space, off-world, the question, what do you even take off-world, is probably driven by different things. But before we go to that, do you want to give us a little bit of a background of the thought process generally, independent of the items, when you say, and you as an aspiring Martian, when you took the decision to go there, what are the thought processes before we go into the items that you would want to take and can take with you?
For me, there was no thought process. It's just a necessity that eventually we'll need to leave home if we are going to treasure the 4 billion years of evolution of terrestrial life. Then eventually planet Earth will no longer be livable. And there's no time like the present to begin to prepare for that eventuality. But just touching back on essential items and values, so maybe I would start with essential items. When we're thinking about essential items, I would take an extremely broad perspective and say, in the first category, there's shelter. So all types of living systems require some kind of shelter from the environment at certain stages. When we leave the comfort of home, our home planet with its magnetic field and atmosphere, the types of shelter that we require will change. But the next category is warmth, is power, and that's in the form of our sun. So even if we travel within the solar system, we'll still have the warmth of the sun as the next essential item, warmth. So shelter, warmth, water. All known life requires water. This is one of the unifying factors of all known life on Earth. All known life is on Earth currently. H2O. So this is not an uncommon molecule in the solar system, luckily. And the reason the South Pole is the target location for both the US and partners and China and partners' permanent research stations is because of the permanently shadowed craters that harbor this critical molecule in the form of ice. On Mars also we'll find access to this H2O molecule, but yeah, I think these are the threads throughout not only human history but the history of life, where shelter, warmth, water, next I would say food, sustenance, nutrition, the photosynthetic belts that we can see from space on our planet, we take for granted perhaps most of the time, regulating our climate, providing our food, our breathable air. These we cannot take for granted when we leave home, so the kind of essential items that you would bring with you on a space mission would include your indoor vertical farming infrastructure and of course seeds. So while you can 3D print your essential toothbrush once you arrive in the place you're going, assuming you bring that kind of technology with you, seeds are one thing we cannot print, and that will be an incredibly essential item to bring with, would be a seed bank in order to produce food in the new location. Communication would be the final essential item, I would say, so shelter, power, water, food, and communication systems. But even if we take these all for granted, these are the essential infrastructure for all known life, humans included. Most importantly, I think they're not the values. So what do we value? What do we bring with us on top of these essential items to sustain ourselves? And that's the really interesting question. So I would take for granted that we have the infrastructure functioning. And in fact, in my opinion, we can discuss, all the technology exists to live beyond Earth. We've already been living beyond Earth. The first space stations in Earth orbit were already there in the 1970s with the Soviet Union. We've been continuously living in the International Space Station for 24 years, and the vacuum of space and the low Earth orbit environment is quite challenging, so we've done well to demonstrate that we can survive in the vacuum of space in a small compartment where 6 humans have been continuously living, different humans of course, continuously living for the past 24 years. We now have the Chinese space station also. The surface of the moon brings its own challenges in terms of temperature, because the 14 days of night result in temperatures plummeting to like negative 120 degrees Celsius. So now when we're thinking about warmth and the production of warmth and power and uninterrupted power systems to sustain even technology through the lunar night, then power systems become really, really essential. But yeah, in fact on Mars it will be easier than either Earth orbit or the moon, in my humble opinion. Further away, given, but in fact easier with an atmosphere and a planet to live on. So the more important question than the essential items when we're thinking about the next steps for humanity would be, the values with which we do this. Will objects represent these values, or will culture represent these values, or will it be a mixture of both? And I think Mars can provide, whether or not we make it to Mars, this can provide an interesting thought experiment for the culture with which we go forward on Earth, because Mars provides this unique context with which we can say, let's reimagine the fundamental principles on which we would build a community if we could do it from scratch. Because on Earth we're so intertwined with what exists, the legacy of previously existing systems, all of our ancestors that have come before, all of their ideas are in our mind and in us. And when we're thinking about going forward, it's difficult to disentangle ourselves from this sometimes and think with what items what do we want to keep and what do we want to leave behind. And Mars, even if we don't get there in my lifetime, I think it's a great thought experiment to say, imagine you arrive on a new planet with your essential items that keep you alive. With what values and what fundamental principles would you establish a new world there? And how can this thinking translate back to imagining the future here on Earth?
I think it's very interesting what you say, that in planning or imagining this life of planet, be it the moon or Mars, that essential items are, or the thought process is a lot about things that maybe in Paula's project didn't play such a role, because we take air, for example, for granted, temperature for granted, all kinds of things for granted, where we need to even question those more elementary things when we decide what is essential. And a lot of that, what you mentioned, is scientific things, things that keep us alive in the first place. But one follow-on question, if you imagine now space travel going further than maybe the next 20, 30, 40 years, and going to Mars or maybe other moons in the solar system becomes a more regular thing, and we get beyond how to survive, you figured out how to survive. Do you think what Paula is showing us today and what she said will start to creep into that as well, faster than we think, that we take for granted we can survive on Mercury, we can survive on Mars or Venus or wherever?
Sorry, can you say?
So for now, now that we go the first time to Mars, or when we went the first time to the moon, the essential items were, like you said, mainly driven by scientific things, survival, and so on and so forth. But eventually, can you imagine that it becomes so natural to go to Mars or to Titan or whatever, that survivability is not the concern anymore, and we start thinking about essential items like Paula describes in her project?
So I'm not sure exactly how to answer that, but I think what venturing out of our comfort zone will demonstrate, and maybe people will celebrate this through objects or maybe through traditions or through cultural practices, is the interconnectedness of life. Sorry, I'll take the conversation back into the clouds. Because, I think what we often take for granted here on Earth is you say it's scientific, but I would say it's fundamental. It's not science that makes these essential items, it's our very nature, our very being as living things that require these set of resources. And perhaps our culture here on Earth and perhaps our interaction with objects has moved away from our fundamental interconnectedness with the reality around us. So, for example, what has stood the test of time are hydrogen atoms. So did you know that the hydrogen atoms that form 10% of your mass are as old as the universe itself, if the Big Bang theory is taken to be our current best theory of the origins of the universe. So we don't know of any astronomical processes whereby hydrogen is produced besides the Big Bang itself. The very early matter that was created during the Big Bang formed the majority of hydrogen that exists in the universe. So what has stood the test of time is literally 10% of your body right now as you sit in this room, which is 14 billion years old, which is the original hydrogen produced in the Big Bang. So there's an example of an essential item that stood the test of time and probably will continue to do so. So I think our creativity and our imaginations and our essential day-to-day life manifest these different objects that we work with, whether it's for our cultural practices or our daily enjoyment or creativity. These are just re-manifestations of the original matter that forms the universe. I took your question right back into space, sorry.
Absolutely interesting, though, to just realize that again, or tell ourselves that or for the first time maybe, when you say that, it's very humbling to think how old the hydrogen actually is in our universe and what we're made of. Paula, you mentioned that you also brought another project of yours with you today that you performed during COVID. Tell us a little bit about that project.
Yes, I tell you about that. So while I was doing this project, the Everything We Touch that we see here on the screen, I think I'm kind of like more obsessed with the present, in order to understand the future. And I think what this sort of project gives me is different perspective into different lives. People live in different parts of the world, of different ages, different belief systems, different hopes and fears and needs than mine. And that helped me see life from the point of view of others. And that's something that I use all the time in my work. When COVID happened, and can we see the images of the lockdown, please? Yeah. When COVID happened, I, like everybody else, we found ourselves in the musical chairs. In the moment that everything stopped, you were in the place where COVID found you, being traveling or at home or about to purchase a house, or COVID found people in the situation where they were at that time and plan. And myself, I started to reflect on how life was changing or was going to change during the time. And the first thing I noticed in my personal case was that my everyday items were changing. And the way that I started to use my everyday things was different. I was putting more emphasis on objects that I probably ignored before, the way that I was listening to music and cleaning and exercising and working, and everything was different. So because I was doing the other project since 2014, I was wanting to know how people in different parts of the world were experiencing these kind of like difficult times. So because I wasn't able to go and photograph anyone, never alone, traveling or touching everybody's things, I put a call in social media asking people to reflect on the 15 items that became the most essential to their lives during lockdown. And these are the collection of photos from all around the world. I created a hashtag at the time, and then I tracked the hashtag, and I tracked everybody that posted a photo. And I created an online archive, which is called Lockdown. It's called Future Archaeology of a Global Lockdown. So I think I lost my mic. It's called Lockdown Essentials. Yes, can you hear me? Yes, it's called Lockdown Essentials. And it's over 1,000 photos representing more than 50 countries of how life felt that time. But it's really interesting. I think we see a lot of things to do with culture here as well, because when I was reflecting earlier in a day in the life, we go through very similar moves and waves of movement. During lockdown, in all the photos, you also see how the items that were closest to that culture's hopes and fears. So that's really interesting to see. And what you see on the photos as well, because people had to submit their photos when they were posting them with a description of the 15 items and explain the rationale behind that, why they were essentials. So I realized how most of the comments were about coping. So how societies and how people cope around the world was different. And it had to do with religion, it had to do with perhaps entertainment and distraction, mental health, books, communication, the way we did things changed dramatically. Our mobile devices and digital devices, while they were essential before, they became essential to work, to attend church, to communicate with others. So it was a very interesting exercise to see those objects that we place value in them, not because we need them from only functional purposes, but the ones that are letting us go through a difficult time of adapting to a new paradigm. And I think things came back some of them to the way they used to be, and some others change forever. But understanding how objects are telling us a story of what were the things that we perhaps feared the most during that time, I think was a very good exercise.
When you showed us the first project, you said that culturally there was not a lot of difference between those items.
Yes.
Now in this COVID project, were there cultural differences? Could you recognize something, or still the same?
No, there are. And I didn't mean to wash culture on my first comment, but you're right that I said that. What I meant, of course, you see things on my photos that have to do with, specific things to do with religion, with food, with the way, we dress, or perhaps, the things we read. But what I meant there is actually we are going through the motions of the day in a very similar way, apart from that. And we may be searching for meaning or spirituality through different religions, but we're searching for that meaning, or we are looking for comfort or even warmth, as you said before. And on this one, for example, the photo you have there in the screen is from Ecuador, from Quito, and we see there shamanic elements and how a particular society was dealing with that. I have many photographs from Nigeria and from Kenya. We have actually one here, and it's the computer to attend the church next to the Bible with the microphone, to do karaoke after church, to relax and unwind. And the little green ball that you see there is representing the matatu, the buses in Kenya, because they were essential to take the person that took that photo to work. This one is from Philippines, and one of the things that in the Philippine society was hardest was the closing of all the karaoke places. So we have here, a computer playing Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen to represent that way of doing that from home. So everybody took the exercise as they wanted. Here is a family in Argentina, an assembly family of mom, dad, and son of the dad, well, girlfriend, dad, and son. And each of them have their own space within the home and came together in that sofa, but everybody had their own objects. So here is what the archive looks like for everybody to look at the stories. It's interesting how we are going to reflect back in time in the future, really. I think it's just showing a picture of a moment in time.
I highly recommend everyone here to check out the website of Paula. You can look at basically all these photos, but it invoked a question I'm very interested now in asking you, Adriana. If you look at the different space agencies on Earth from the different nations, do you see differences how they would approach going off-world and what they would care about or not care about when going, let's say, to Mars?
Yeah, I think space exploration gives us the opportunity to have a unified vision for the future. And so luckily we have Paula keeping us in the present here, because now I'm going to tell a story that I didn't plan to tell, but it seems like it's in my mind, so let me say it. Now I'm going into the past. So during lockdown, couldn't travel, couldn't do my regular activities. I was very involved in doing Proudly Human's Off-World project. I'd recently traveled to Antarctica. I've been to deserts in the Middle East and Africa looking for locations to run our extreme environment experiments. And then lockdown hit. So my partner and I at the time decided to live in the forest. We didn't want to get too involved in the imminent regulatory system that seemed around the corner. So we decided to build a cabin in the Tsitsikamma forest in South Africa, in a pristine, beautiful, beautiful indigenous forest, kind of untouched. Except by the people who've been living there for around 10,000 years. So the San, potentially the world's earliest modern humans, there's evidence of them having lived there for 20,000 years, but it may be much older even. So this was the location where we built our cabin. We carried all the equipment down ourselves and built like 2 tons of stuff down a mountain, built the cabin, and then lived there. And during this time, we actually found an archaeological site with a burial site. We found an ancient San burial site just up the river from our cabin. So yeah, sleeping there at night, we'd often hear the river trickling down, and it sounded like women and children laughing. And just the idea, we actually found these terraced gardens on the sides of the valley, which indicated definite human intervention, and it was the north-facing slope where herbs and other medicinal plants and foods would have been grown for probably around a few tens of thousands of years. So we found this compacted area with seashells. This is 10 kilometers from the ocean, and when you see a compacted site with a lot of seashells far from the ocean, this is indicative of human activity usually. So we started to brush away and revealed the top of what turned out to be a human skull. We recovered the burial site, actually out of respect later. But what we did find around that site was all the tools, the essential items for this person. My mother visited and said she thought it was a woman. We didn't know who it may have been, but this was a fisher person who had come upstream from the ocean with seashells and basic tools as their essential items. Like cutting tools, stone cutting tools. We also found sinkers, so a round stone with a niche carved around it to use as a sinker. So my partner assumed that this was for fishing eel, and he took these actual sinkers and tried to fish for eel himself in the same pond that this person would have done so potentially thousands of years ago. We didn't succeed at that. But this was this individual's essential item kit. Basic stone cutting tools, basic sinkers, and other leather, I guess, items that wouldn't have stood the test of time. But what struck me, rather than thinking about the differences with which we may approach space exploration, are indeed like the threads that unite us throughout human history. These are the tools that we navigate great climate change. So the San people survived through all sorts of global climate catastrophes with these very simple tools. So was it indeed the tools with which they survived that reality, or the culture? And that was an interesting point to reflect on, this kind of migratory way of life, of hunter-gathering, of taking, what you can carry with you as your essential items, and probably the culture having been what sustained these people. Far be it from me to comment on that culture, but I think an intrinsic interconnectivity with nature certainly defined these people. a very light footprint on the environments with which they coexisted, a kind of egalitarian society where everybody had a say and not living permanently in one place. So what I see as the future of space exploration is maybe a return to that. Groups of people where each individual has their own say in terms of what the culture of that community may be, having a light touch on the environment, taking the necessary resources but not having a big impact, moving around, let's hope, hopping from moon to moon to solar system to galaxy. If we eventually develop the technology for that, what kind of culture will we do it with? And maybe it will be maybe not so much hunting, but a gathering kind of community where we take resources from different asteroids, 3D print stuff, and hop on a grand adventure through the universe. I mean, I don't think I'll live that long, but that would be a grand future I'd wait around for.
Makes me dream already. I'm conscious of time. We're running out of time. We want to give the audience also a couple of minutes to ask questions, but I have one final question for both of you, and maybe we try to answer it shortly. Start with you, Paula, but it's the same question to you, Adriana. What would you recommend for the next generation when thinking about objects and values for the future?
Before thinking about the objects and values for the future, my recommendation to future generations will be to, open your eyes to observe what's around you. And many of the questions about the future, I think they are here in the present. I work in a world where I get asked by organizations like, what's the future of health, well-being, luxury, future of sports, future of banking? And what I always find that those questions have a hidden question that actually people are asking, what's the present? That's the part that sometimes we don't understand. And I think we don't understand it because sometimes people look at the future only from the place where they stand. And if you only look at the things from where you stand, you are looking linearly, and that line will not always be clear or sharp. So my recommendation will be gain as many possible views about the present from people that have a complete different life experience to the one you have in any filter or angle that you want to call different life experience, and gain as much perspective about as you want. And as a closing thing that I want to say on that, when you saw these photos, and it is interesting how sometimes when we think about the future, we place the future in the wrong place. I've shown you photos that I've taken 10 years ago, and they look normal to you. I don't think anybody would have looked at the photos and say, oh, that's so old. And if something looks old, it will be because you spotted an iPhone 4, like an iPhone 4 on a photo from 2014. So what actually ages before your fork and knife and your tea towel is your iPhone and your computer and your camera. So those are the things that, when we think about the future, most of things will look pretty similar to, how we do them today, at least 20 years ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Adriana?
Yeah, what are the fundamental principles with which we should embark on the journey into the future? Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think we need to return to basics if we're going to break it down to some united vision that we can all share. Whether we from different parts of the world or different space agencies, what we will need on Earth and beyond is a united vision for the future. And if I were to break that down to one element, I think it would be a respect for life. So as a researcher in quantum biology, life is the one phenomenon that I would say we have no clue about. We've made some progress, but we have no idea how biology emerges from physics and chemistry. We don't know how to make life. We can't really describe it. As a physicist, I would say we have no description for the phenomenon of life. But yet we are alive, and maybe as living systems we can never fully understand ourselves. So I would say this mysterious phenomenon of life is something to be cherished and respected. And whether we're thinking about the bacteria that makes up more than half of our cells, or the photosynthetic organisms that regulate our ecology here, or all the creatures with whom we share this biosphere, and each other, most importantly. I think a greater respect for life may be manifested when we leave Earth, because then it will be pretty obvious that we need to cherish each and every member of that society, whether it's a plant or a human. Here on Earth, I think we need to move back to respect for life. Remember that there's no such thing as a single living organism. And perhaps if that's the fundamental unified vision, then we can work on the details later.
Thank you. With this, I would like to open up the floor for questions from the audience. I don't know, do we need microphones with?
Thank you. This question is for Paula. Did you think to ask the same people pre-COVID and post-COVID, but to do the same thing and to compare it? Basically, the choice of whatever they're collecting?
No, I haven't, but I have had people that have done a day in the life exercise with me and then have done the COVID one. So there is a comparison between those essentials and not. It's going to be like 10 years from, it is now 10 years from my first photograph, so I'm kind of like planning to go back to some of the stories to see kind of like life changes. Yes, no, but I think it will be like interesting to reflect on the essentials of COVID probably in 5 or 10 years time and to see what things change, you know, in terms of behavior and values.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Remind me in 10 years to do it. Sure. Thank you.
Great. Hi. Thank you. I mean, you both present different cases, so I'm going to try to complicate and integrate both of this in one. So this, the observation of the objects is interesting for me, and I would be keen to see what kind of hidden politics are behind the objects, and what kind of politics you think is created. Now, if it's being created, do you think there's a possibility to make a kind of politics by the objects we consume, where it is produced, the geographies they have, because they mean something, you know, and I think that I can imagine embedded in the work, you can see some uncomfortable truths about how the world has been organized. So I'd like to see what you make of that. And then I think, Adriana, this links to your work in this endeavor to occupy another territory, and how, again, politicized the occupation of any territory is. We can't get it right on planet Earth. I always wonder about the first occupants and their claims that they would have. So you would need certain devices, prosthetics, objects to occupy that land, which comes back to the objects that you may need to occupy, because you need to have some adaptations. What do you think that does to the evolutionary process of our biology here? So do you think that those objects will help amplify or stunt our evolutionary presence on those new territories?
So we start, shall I start with the first part? Thank you for your question. Yes, you can make a political statement about the photos, and you can look at them from different angles. I can give you some examples of things that caught my attention. I've done some photographs, for example, I've done a series in China, and it was interesting how the younger generations had a complete different set of objects to the older generations, but that was a reflection from the point of view of the younger to the older. I was photographing the 17-year-old puppeteer, folk musician. Everything that he had in his photo was Chinese objects from China, made in China. And you could see no global brands represented there, or everything that he read or the music that he played was local. When the person that I'm photographing after him is a 28-year-old screen printing illustrator, and she looked at the photo of the man, and she told me, I'm playing her own words, she says like, wow, I'm a citizen of the world, he isn't. And that was her statement based on the objects. And I asked her, what makes you consider yourself a citizen of the world different to him? And he said, because the music I listen to, the books I read, the clothes I wear, and she was dressed from H&M to Uniqlo to reading Baudelaire to, she said, it's from a different world. You know, I belong to a new generation of a different world in China. So that's kind of from a perspective of one person. On a complete different angle to give different points. I photograph PhD student in Nottingham in the UK just in 2019, and everything in her photo was had an ethical stand. So none of the clothes that she wore were from a kind of high fast fashion retailer. There was no plastic even on her photo, from a dry shampoo in cubes to a bamboo toothbrush to moving only by bike or consuming vegan food, and every single touch point of her had to do with an intentional intent of how she wanted to live her life. So I think that you can make a lot of conclusions from that, and looking at the objects from that way and question so many layers, like where is manufactured, where the object comes from, how many mileage there is from the place of manufacturing to the place of usage, what is the brand, what does that brand stand for, what's the wear and tear of that object, and what's the lifespan of that object in your life. So there are a lot of layers there.
Interestingly framed question. Maybe it takes a fellow South African to talk about occupying territory without using the word colonization, because often people talk about space exploration and use the word colonization, which I avoid completely. Try to. So even that word, I would even have to debate the words used there. So with relation to, because I could speak for hours, with relation to what I've already said, perhaps that more migratory hunter-gatherer approach to the environment that we would not be occupying, but graciously in harmony interacting with, would inform the kinds of objects that would be essential. And I'm thinking of like what they call a circular economy. So the way that we would interact with the land that we would be living with and not on, I hope, would be a circularity of resources. So because we have limited equipment with us, and because our settlement there would be so tenuous, we would be forced to have a very light touch on the surface in the absence of the luxury of heavy infrastructure. So the small amounts of H2O that we took out of the sand, for example, would be recycled almost infinitely within the system, whether it's the hydrogen or the oxygen that we're accessing. The seeds that we brought with from Earth would be the source of all other seeds. So in that sense, we would return back to this kind of light touch, more harmonious interaction with the environment. How would that impact the culture? This heavy reliance on, while I'm talking about light touch, there's a complete and heavy reliance on technology for survival there. So how would that impact people? And I think rather than stunting evolution, I think it would enhance perhaps a return to a more organic kind of culture, where we don't have the luxury of perhaps the systems that we've imposed on ourselves here, the systems that may not last the test of time, the centralized systems of power, for example, which we know do not exist in nature to the extent which we've kind of artificially set them up in this era. So perhaps a return to a more egalitarian society where resources are shared in a more obvious way than perhaps we've arrived at here. Yeah, I could go on for hours. Nice question. I don't think I'll answer that.
Thank you. I think we're way over time. If there's one more question, but if let's try to keep it short, though.
Hi. Sorry. Okay, I just I was wondering about if either of you have looked at the examples of the people who have gone into space or done missions to Antarctica, and the extra objects that they've brought with them, like the examples that spring to mind are musical instruments or costumes. Have you looked more intently at those examples?
Nice question. It reminds me of some of the reading I've done on the early Antarctic explorers, and the rabbit, I think, that made it to Antarctica on one of the early missions in the early 1900s, the bird, various pets made it on, not that these are items, the diaries that were kept, the like drawing tools to paint watercolors of the landscape down in Antarctica. A fascinating question. I've read about it for Antarctica, but it would be an interesting study indeed. Yeah, the instruments, I think the single record that was it Scott's team had brought that they listened to ad nauseum, but still a source of entertainment and enjoyment every night that they said sustained them through those long winter nights. So That's a fascinating study right there.
With this, I want to close the session. It was in the interest of time. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you, Adriana, Paula. Thank you.